Come here, I want to show you something. Right here in my palm. Dark brown, near black at the edges, about the size of a cut plug of tobacco, and heavier than it looks. Smells like an old iron pan and a cold morning at the same time. You wouldn't give it a second glance in the light of day. But I'm going to tell you what this thing cost me to make, and what it would have cost the man who needed it most, and why those two numbers are further apart than you'd ever guess. About $3 a pound, maybe $4, depending on where you source your fat. And kept cold and kept dry, that pound will still be good in 2 years, maybe 5. The old records, the field journals, the company ledgers, the trapper accounts from men who had no reason to exaggerate, have this lasting years on the trail without going bad. Not weeks, not a season. Years. Carried in a leather bag, stuffed in a coat, pulled out at 30 below, when there was nothing else. And here's the thing that ought to be sitting crooked in your head already. The men who depended on this, the ones who crossed this continent in winter on foot and by canoe and by sheer stubbornness, could not get by without it. Not because it tasted good. It doesn't particularly. Not because it was the easiest thing to make. It wasn't. But because everything else they tried, everything that looked more like food, had a way of running out, breaking down, or quietly turning on a man when the cold got serious enough. This is pemmican, the real formula. Not the version in your survival manual, and not the thing on the health food shelf with that name on the label. Those are cousins of this, at best. What I'm holding is the original, and what I'm going to tell you about it is going to contradict most of what you've read. Before I go any further, I'm going to tell you 3 things that are going to happen in this video. First, I'm going to show you the exact formula, what goes in, what ratio, and why, so that by the time you're done watching, you can make this yourself this weekend with materials you can find for under $10. Second, I'm going to tell you why the version being sold under this name today will let you down when the conditions get serious, and why that's not an accident. And third, this is the part I want you to stay for, I'm going to tell you the one mistake that turns this food from the thing that saves you into the thing that quietly doesn't. Men made that mistake. It is documented. And most of the pemmican advice you will find online is still making it right now. Stay with me, because if you leave before we get there, you've only got half the picture, and the half you're missing is the dangerous half. Now hold on to something I'm about to tell you, because it's going to sound wrong. The food that saved more lives in the Rocky Mountain fur trade era than any other food, the thing that men carried when everything else was gone and the alternative was dying. It was not the most calorie-dense food available to them. It was not the highest protein, and it wasn't the cheapest either, not by the pound. Write that down somewhere. A man who could choose anything chose this. Knowing all of that, hold on to that. We'll come back to it. First, you need to understand who we're talking about when we talk about mountain men surviving winter. We're not talking about weekend campers who ran low on trail mix. We're talking about trappers who went out in October and weren't coming back until the spring thaw. 5-6 months of hard winter, some of it well above 6,000 feet, some of it in terrain where rescue didn't exist as a concept. We're talking about the men who supplied the American Fur Company, Hudson's Bay, the Northwest Company, men operating on the absolute margin of what a human body can endure. And they operated on a budget that would make you wince. Most of what they carried had to cost next to nothing, pack small, last months without spoiling, and deliver enough fuel to keep a man moving through 8-hour days in below zero weather. That's not a camping food problem. That's a metabolic engineering problem. And these men solved it with a technology that is so old, it appears in the archaeological record of people who were living on this continent 10,000 years before any trapper walked into the mountains. The food is pemmican. And before you nod like you already know this one, you don't. Not really. Because the version in the survival manual or on the health food shelf, with that name on the label, is not this. It shares the name the way a gas station hot dog shares a name with a real piece of meat. What I'm going to lay out for you is the actual thing. Why it was made the way it was made, why the thing being sold today under that name will let you down when it matters, and why the men who got it right came back, and the men who got it wrong mostly didn't. Most people get this wrong for a reason that makes sense on its face. For the last 50 years or so, everything we've been told about eating right has been built around the same idea. Cut the fat, eat lean, Load up on protein. You see it on every label, in every survival kit, in every protein bar sold to people who spend time outdoors. And it's not a lie, exactly. It just doesn't apply when you're 3 weeks into a February in the mountains with no way out and the temperature hasn't been above zero in a week. In that situation, the rules change. The men who knew that came home. The ones who trusted what the label said did not always make it. The real thing is mostly fat. Not because anyone decided that was a good idea, because the cold decided it. Let me give you the layers, because this only makes sense when you hear it in the right order. The first layer is this. Your body in serious cold does not want lean protein. It wants fat. Not because fat is some miracle food. It isn't in ordinary life. But because when you are cold and working hard and burning through everything you have just to stay warm, fat is what burns long and steady. Lean meat burns fast and leaves you hungry again in 2 hours. You can eat all the jerky you can carry and still feel the cold getting into you by mid-afternoon because you're burning through it as fast as you eat it. Fat holds. Fat lasts. A man who understood that could stretch a small pack a long way. A man who didn't was always hungry and always cold. And that's a combination that will shorten your life in a hard winter. The mountain men didn't have a textbook telling them this. What they had was watching. They watched men who ate wrong get sick and slow down and stop keeping up. And they watched men who ate right keep moving, keep thinking, keep making it from one camp to the next. That's a hard kind of education, but it's the kind that sticks. The second layer is the one that'll really sit with you. And it's something the old trappers had a name for long before any doctor wrote it down. They called it fat hunger. You've maybe heard the modern term, rabbit starvation. The idea is this. If all you have is lean game, rabbit, deer, most of what you can trap in winter, and no fat to go with it, your body will turn on you. You'll eat and still feel wrong. Not hungry exactly, but hollowed out, heavy in the legs, slow in the head. It was documented by explorers, and it was feared by every man who spent real time in the backcountry, because once it set in, it was hard to pull back from. The cure was fat, plain animal fat, not more meat. The fat was the thing the body was screaming for and not getting. The men who had pemmican made right, with enough fat built into every bite, never had to find that out the hard way. The third layer is the ratio, and this is exactly where the modern version gets it wrong and leaves you in trouble. The Cree and Métis people who invented this and perfected it over hundreds of years, the same people who supplied the fur trade companies that ran this whole continent, they made pemmican that was roughly half fat by weight. Not fat as a little extra, fat as the main event, dried lean meat pounded to a powder, mixed into clean rendered tallow, equal parts, pressed together until it sets hard, then dried berries folded in. Not for taste, though they helped with that, but because the men who lived on this for months learned what happened when they didn't have them. Teeth went loose, gums went bad. The berries kept something at bay that the meat and fat alone couldn't hold off. They didn't have a name for what they were preventing. They just knew that the men who skipped the berries on a long trip paid for it by spring. That combination, the right fat ratio, the right preparation, the berries, is what made this thing work. Change any one of those three pieces, and you've got something that looks like pemmican and falls short when it counts. The fourth layer is the one that answers the riddle I gave you at the start. I told you this wasn't the cheapest option by the pound, wasn't the highest protein, wasn't the easiest thing to make. So why did the men who knew what they were doing choose it anyway? Because they were doing the math right. Not cost per pound, cost per day in the field. A trapper carrying good pemmican could go hard all day on 1 pound of it. 1 pound. A man carrying hardtack and jerky needed twice the weight to get through the same day, and he'd still be running a deficit by week 3. The pemmican man carried less, ate less by weight, and came out the other side of winter in better shape. That's the arithmetic that mattered. And the men who'd done it wrong once and survived it never made the same mistake twice. And there's something else that doesn't show up on any ledger. A man eating right in a hard winter stays sharp. He makes better calls. He doesn't push his luck on thin ice because his thinking's gone foggy. He reads the weather, he knows when to stop and when to go. The men who came back from those long winters weren't just lucky, they were thinking clearly in conditions that had already taken the thinking away from everyone around them. What you eat is part of that, a bigger part than most people want to sit with. Here's the whole answer laid out plain. At the start, I told you this food wasn't the most calorie dense, not the highest protein, not the cheapest pound for pound. All of that is true, but a man who understood what cold actually costs, what it takes to keep a body warm and moving and thinking through 6 months of hard winter, knew that none of those measures were the right ones to use. The right measure was how many days of good function you could carry per ounce of pack weight. By that measure, nothing else came close. Nothing. That's why the men who had a choice chose this. Not sentiment, not tradition, because it worked and everything else worked less. Now here's the proof, because I'd rather you trust this than just take my word for it. The Hudson's Bay Company ran men across this continent in winter for the better part of 2 centuries, and they kept books on it. Those books are still in Winnipeg if you want to read them. What they show is that the company bought pemmican by the 90-pound bag from Métis producers and rationed it at 1 pound per man per day for men doing heavy physical work in winter conditions. 1 pound. That's it. The supply lines for an entire continent of fur trade ran on that 1 pound per man. They weren't being stingy. That pound, made right, was enough. In the 1940s, when the military started thinking seriously about feeding men in Arctic conditions, they went back and looked at what the old trade companies had done and arrived at essentially the same answer the Métis had already been giving for 300 years. The right food in the right ratios for the right conditions. Now let me pull back because there's something here that goes past food. The men who died out there, and there were plenty of them, were not soft men or stupid men. They were hard and experienced, and they'd already survived things that would stop most people cold. But they were carrying an idea about food that was just wrong. And the country they were in had no patience for wrong ideas. They were certain that meat was meat, certain that a full belly meant a fed body, certain of the one thing they didn't know at all, that the cold had changed the rules and nobody had told them. That's the thing that gets people, not ignorance. Certainty. Ignorance you can fix. A man who knows he doesn't know something will ask. A man who's certain doesn't ask. He's already got his answer. And out in country that doesn't care whether you live, the most dangerous thing you can carry is a wrong answer you're sure of. The men worth learning from were never the certain ones. They were the ones who had been wrong already, buried those assumptions somewhere back on the trail, and were still paying attention. The old-timers, the Cree women who made the pemmican and knew more about keeping a man alive in winter than any expedition journal ever gave them credit for. The trappers who'd had a bad season and come out of it changed. That's who you wanted to know. That's who carried the real knowledge. And the lesson they had wasn't complicated. It was just expensive to learn any other way. There's one more thing I want to say before we get to the carry list. You'll hear people talk about pemmican like it's a perfect food, the only food you'd need, something a man could live on alone forever. That's not true, and I won't leave you with it. A man who eats nothing but this for months, with nothing fresh alongside it, will get scurvy. Teeth go first, then joints. It's a slow, ugly thing, and it killed men on long expeditions who trusted their rations too completely. The berries help, but they're not enough on their own for a very long haul. Pemmican is a foundation, a remarkable one, but you build on top of it. Whatever the season puts in front of you, whatever grows, whatever you can take on the move, the men who lived long knew that. They treated this as the thing you always had, the thing that never failed you, and they filled in the gaps with everything else. Here's how you carry all of this. 1. In serious cold, fat is the fuel, not protein, not anything lean. Fat. Half your food, by weight, should be good animal fat. That's not a suggestion. It's what the cold demands. 2. Lean meat alone will turn on you. A pack full of jerky looks like survival food. In a hard winter, it's a slow problem. Without fat alongside it, you'll eat and still go hollow. The trappers had seen it. Don't let it be news to you when it's too late. 3. Real pemmican is equal parts dried meat and rendered fat by weight. That ratio isn't a preference. It's what 300 years of men depending on this worked out through hard experience. Don't make it leaner because it seems healthier. That's the modern mistake talking. 4. Put the berries in. If you're going past a weekend, put the berries in. Not for flavor, for what they prevent. 5. This is not expensive food, but you have to do the math right. It's not cheap by the pound, it's cheap by the day. There's a difference and it matters. 6. The knowledge exists. It always has. But there's no money in it for anyone selling you food, so it got quiet. You have to go back past the industry to find it, which is what you just did. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I mean it. What's a piece of knowledge that somebody handed you? A grandparent, an old-timer, somebody who'd been through something hard, that turned out to be more true than anything you read in a book or saw on a label? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. This crowd knows things that aren't written down anywhere, and I'd rather hear it than not. And here's what's coming next, because I've been sitting on this one, and it's been nagging at me the same way this one did, before I figured it out. There's a skill that every man who spends time outdoors thinks he knows. One of the oldest skills there is, and every guide you can buy teaches it in a way that will get you in trouble when the conditions turn serious. Not a little wrong, the opposite of right. The reason it got taught backward is the same reason pemmican disappeared. Somewhere along the way, someone wrote it down wrong, and everyone since has copied that version. And now the wrong way is so familiar that the right way sounds like the crazy idea. We'll get into exactly what it is next time. Until then, keep your fire small and your pack lighter than you think it needs to be.